Chapter 4 of the Wonderful History of Peter Schlemihl, the Man Who Lost His Shadow. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Ashley M. The Wonderful History of Peter Schlemihl, the Man Who Lost His Shadow, by Adelbert von CHAMISSO, translated by Frederic Henry Hedge, Chapter 4. Footnote. This chapter presents a vivid illustration of the histrionic deceits with which human life abounds. It shows how often, amidst the obscurity and elusive complications of this world, men, both voluntarily and involuntarily, play parts which do not belong to them. Continually, persons are not seen to be what they are, but are believed to be what they are not. Meanwhile, the supreme victory and blessedness of man are really to be what he ought to be, seem to others to be what he is, and be treated accordingly by all. End footnote. I must pass in my relation hastily over a time in which how gladly would I linger could I but conjure up the living spirit of it with the recollection. But the color which vivified it, and which only can vivify it again, is extinguished in me. And when I seek in my bosom what then so mightily animated it, the grief and the joy, the innocent illusion, then do I vainly smite a rock in which no living spring now dwells, for the God is departed from me. How changed does this past time now appear to me! I would act in the watering place an heroic character, ill-studied, and myself a novice on the boards, and my gaze lured from my part by a pair of blue eyes. The parents, deluded by the play, offer everything only to make the business quickly secure, and the poor farce closes in mockery, and that is all that presents itself now to me so absurd and commonplace, although it is terrible that that can thus appear to me which then so richly, so luxuriantly swelled my bosom. Mina, as I wept at losing thee, so weep I still to have lost thee also in myself. Am I then become so old? Oh, melancholy reason! Oh, but for one pulsation of that time, one moment of that illusion, but no! Alone on the high waste sea of thy bitter flood, and long out of the last cup of wine the elfin has vanished. I have sent forward Bendel with some purses of gold to procure for me a dwelling adapted to my needs. He had then scattered about much money and expressed himself somewhat indefinitely respecting the distinguished stranger whom he served, for I would not be named, and that filled the good people with extraordinary fancies. As soon as my house was ready, Bendel returned to conduct me thither. We set out. About 3 miles from the place, on a sunny plain, our progress was obstructed by a gay festal throng. The carriage stopped. Music, sound of bells, discharge of cannon were heard. A loud vivat rent the air. Before the door of the carriage appeared, clad in white, a troop of damsels of extraordinary beauty, but who were eclipsed by one in particular as the stars of night by the sun. She stepped forth from the midst of her sisters. The tall and delicate figure kneeled blushing before me, and presented to me on a silken cushion a garland woven of laurel, olive branches, and roses, while she uttered some words about majesty, veneration, and love, which I did not understand, but whose bewitching silver tone intoxicated my ears and heart. It seemed as if the heavenly apparition had some time already passed before me. The chorus struck in and sung the praises of a good king and the happiness of his people. And this scene, my dear friend, in the face of the sun, she kneeled still only 2 paces from me, and I without a shadow could not spring over the gulf, could not also fall on the knee before the angel. Oh, what would I then have given for a shadow? I was compelled to hide my shame, my anguish, my despair, deep in the bottom of my carriage. At length Bendel recollected himself on my behalf. He leaped out of the carriage on the other side. I called him back and gave him out my jewel case, which lay at hand, a splendid diamond crown, which had been made to adorn the brows of the lovely Fanny. He stepped forward and spoke in the name of his master, who could not and would not receive such tokens of homage. There must be some mistake, and the good people of the city were thanked for their good will. As he said this, he took up the proffered wreath and laid the brilliant coronet in his place. He then extended respectfully his hand to the lovely maiden, that she might arise, and dismissed with a sign clergy, magistrates, and all the deputations. No one else was allowed to approach. He ordered the throng to divide and make way for the horses, sprang again into the carriage, and on we went at full gallop through a festive archway of foliage and flowers towards the city. The discharges of cannon continued. The carriage stopped before my house. I sprang hastily in at the door, dividing the crowd which the desire to see me had collected. The mob hurrahed under my window, and I let double ducats rain out of it. In the evening the city was voluntarily illuminated. And yet I did not know at all what all this could mean, and who I was supposed to be. I sent out Rascal to make inquiry. He brought word to this effect, that the people had received certain intelligence that the good king of Prussia travelled through the country under the name of a Graf, that my adjutant had been recognized, and finally, how great the joy was as they became certain that they really had me in the place. They now saw clearly that I evidently desired to maintain the strictest incognito, and how very wrong it had been to attempt so importunately to lift the veil. But I had resented it so graciously, so kindly, I should certainly pardon their good-heartedness. The thing appeared so amusing to the rogue that he did his best, by reproving words, the more to strengthen the good folk in their belief. He made a very comical recital of all this, and as he found that it diverted me, he made a joke to me of his own additional wickedness. Shall I confess it? It flattered me, even by such means, to be taken for that honoured head. I commanded a feast to be prepared for the evening of the next day, beneath the trees which overshadowed the open space before my house, and the whole city to be invited to it. The mysterious power of my purse, the exertions of Bendel, and the active invention of Rascal succeeded in triumphing over time itself. It is really astonishing how richly and beautifully everything was arranged in those few hours. The splendor and abundance which exhibited themselves, and the ingenious lighting up, so admirably contrived that I felt myself quite secure, left me nothing to desire. I could not but praise my servants. The evening grew dark. The guests appeared and were presented to me. Nothing more was said about Majesty. I was styled, with deep reverence and obeisance, Herr Graf. What was to be done? I allowed the Herr Graf to please, and remained from that hour the Graf Peter. In the midst of festive multitudes, my soul yearned alone after one. She entered late. She was and wore the crown. She followed modestly her parents, and seemed not to know that she was the loveliest of all. They were presented to me as Mr. Forest-master, his lady, and their daughter. I found many agreeable and obliging things to say to the old people. Before the daughter I stood like a rebuked boy, and could not bring out one word. I begged her at length, with a faltering tone, to honour this feast by assuming the office whose insignia she graced. She entreated with blushes and a moving look to be excused, but, blushing still more than herself in her presence, I paid her as her first subject my homage with a most profound respect, and the hint of the Graf became to all the guests a command which every one with emulous joy hastened to obey. Majesty, innocence, and grace presided in alliance with beauty over a rapturous feast. Mina's happy parents believed their child only thus exalted in honour of them. I myself was in indescribable intoxication. I caused all the jewels which yet remained of those which I had formerly purchased in order to get rid of burdensome gold, all the pearls, all the precious stones, to be laid in 2 covered dishes, and at the table, in the name of the Queen, to be distributed round to her companions and to all the ladies. Gold, in the meantime, was incessantly strewn over the enclosing lists among the exulting people. Bendel the next morning revealed to me in confidence that the suspicion which he had long entertained of Rascal's honesty was now become certainty, that he had yesterday embezzled whole purses of gold. "Let us permit," replied I, "the poor scoundrel to enjoy the petty plunder. I spend willingly on everybody. Why not on him? Yesterday he and all the fresh people you have brought me served me honestly. They helped me joyfully to celebrate a joyful feast." There was no further mention of it. Rascal remained the first of my servants, but Bendel was my friend and my confidant. The latter was accustomed to regard my wealth as inexhaustible, and he pried not after its sources. Entering into my humor, he assisted me rather to discover opportunities to exercise it and to spend my gold. Of that unknown one, that pale snake, he knew only this, that I could alone through him be absolved from the curse which waited on me, and that I feared him on whom my sole hope reposed. That, for the rest, I was convinced that he could discover me anywhere, I him nowhere, and that, therefore, awaiting the promised day, I abandoned every vain inquiry. The magnificence of my feast and my behavior at it held at first the credulous inhabitants of the city firmly to their preconceived opinion. True, it was soon stated in the newspapers that the whole story of the journey of the King of Prussia had been a mere groundless rumor, but a king I now was, and must, spite of everything, a king remain, and truly one of the most rich and royal who had ever existed, only people did not rightly know what king. The world had never had reason to complain of the scarcity of monarchs, at least in our time. The good people, who had never seen any of them, pitched with equal correctness first on one and then on another. Graf Peter still remained who he was. At one time appeared amongst the guests at a bath a tradesman who had made himself bankrupt in order to enrich himself, and who enjoyed universal esteem, and had a broad though somewhat pale shadow. The property which he had scraped together he resolved to lay out in ostentation, and it even occurred to him to enter into rivalry with me. I had recourse to my purse, and soon brought the poor fellow to such a pass that in order to save his credit he was obliged to become bankrupt a second time, and hasten over the frontier. Thus I got rid of him. In this neighbourhood I made many idlers and good-for-nothing fellows. With all the royal splendour and expenditure by which I made all succumb to me, I still in my own house lived very simply and retired. I had established the strictest circumspection as a rule. No one except Bendel, under any pretence whatever, was allowed to enter the rooms which I inhabited. So long as the sun shone I kept myself shut up there, and it was said the Graf is employed in his cabinet. With this employment numerous couriers stood in connection whom I for every trifle sent out and received. I received company only under my trees, or in my hall arranged and lighted according to Bendel's plan. When I went out, on which occasions it was necessary that I should be constantly watched by the argus eyes of Bendel, it was only to the forester's garden, for the sake of one alone. For my love was the innermost heart of my life. Oh, my good CHAMISSO, I will hope that thou hast not yet forgotten what love is. Mina was really an amiable, kind, good child. I had taken her whole imagination captive. She could not, in her humility, conceive how she could be worthy that I should have fixed my regard on her alone, and she returned my love with all the youthful power of an innocent heart. She loved like a woman, offering herself wholly up, self-forgetting, living wholly and solely for him who was her life. But I, oh, what terrible hours, terrible and yet worthy that I should wish them back again. Have I often wept on Bendel's bosom, when, after the first unconscious intoxication, I recollected myself, looked sharply into myself, I, without a shadow, with knavish selfishness destroying this angel, this pure soul. Then I did resolve to reveal myself to her. Then did I swear to tear myself from her and to fly. Then did I burst out into tears and concert with Bendel how in the evening I should visit her in the forester's garden. At other times I flattered myself with great expectations from the rapidly approaching visit from the grey man. I wept again when I had in vain tried to believe in it. I had calculated the day on which I expected again to see the fearful one, for he had said in a year and a day, and I believed his word. The parents, good, honourable old people, who loved their only child extremely, were amazed, and knew not what to do. Earlier they could not have believed that the Graf Peter could think only of their child, but now he really loved her, and was beloved again. The mother was probably vain enough to believe in the probability of a marriage and to seek for it. The sound masculine understanding of the father did not give way to such overstretched imaginations. Both were persuaded of the purity of my love. They could do nothing more than pray for their child. I have laid my hand on a letter from Mina of this date which I still retain. Yes, this is her own writing. I transcribe it for thee. Thou canst imagine how the words must cut through my heart. I explained to her that I was not what people believed me, that I was only a rich but infinitely miserable man, that a curse rested on me, which must be the only secret between us, since I was not yet without hope that it should be loosed, that this was the poison of my days, that I might drag her down with me into the gulf, she who was the sole light, the sole happiness, the sole heart of my life. Then wept she again because I was unhappy. Ah, she was so loving, so kind. To spare me but one tear, she, and with what transport, would have sacrificed herself without reserve. In the meantime she was far from rightly comprehending my words. She conceived in me some prince on whom had fallen a heavy ban, some high and honoured head, and her imagination amidst heroic pictures limned forth her lover gloriously. Once I said to her, Mina, the last day in the next month may change my fate and decide it. If not, I must die, for I will not make thee unhappy. Weeping, she hid her head in my bosom. If thy fortune changes, let me know that thou art happy. I have no claim on thee. Art thou wretched? Bind me to thy wretchedness, and I may help thee to bear it. Maiden, maiden, take it back, that word, that foolish word which escaped thy lips. And knowest thou this wretchedness? Knowest thou this curse? Knowest who thy love? What he? Seest thou not that I convulsively shrink together, and have a secret from thee? She fell sobbing to my feet, and repeated with tears her entreaty. I announced to the forest-master, who entered, that it was my intention on the first approaching of the month to solicit the hand of his daughter. I fixed precisely this time because in the interim many things might occur which might influence my fortunes, that I was unchangeable in my love to his daughter. The good man was quite startled as he heard such words out of the mouth of Graf Peter. He fell on my neck and again became quite ashamed to have thus forgotten himself. Then he began to doubt, to weigh, and to inquire. He spoke of dowry, security, and the fortune for his beloved child. I thanked him for reminding me of these things. I told him that I desired to settle myself in this country, where I seemed to be beloved, and to lead a carefree life. I begged him to purchase the finest estate that his daughter had to offer in the name of his daughter, and to charge the cost to me. A father could, in such matter, best serve a lover. It gave him enough to do, for everywhere a stranger was before him, and he could only purchase for about $1,000,000. My thus employing him was, at the bottom, an instant scheme to remove him to a distance, and I had employed him similarly before, for I must confess that he was rather wearisome. The good mother was, on the contrary, somewhat deaf, and not, like him, jealous of the honor of entertaining the Graf. The mother joined us. The happy people pressed me to stay longer with them that evening. I dared not remain another minute. I saw already the rising moon glimmer on the horizon. My time was up. The next evening I went again to the forester's garden. I had thrown my cloak over my shoulders and pulled my hat over my eyes. I advanced to Mina. As she looked up and beheld me, she gave an involuntary start, and there stood again clear before my soul the apparition of that terrible night when I showed myself in the moonlight without a shadow. It was actually she! But had she also recognized me? She was silent and thoughtful. On my bosom lay 100-weight pressure. I arose from my seat. She threw herself silently weeping on my bosom. I went. I now found her often in tears. It grew darker and darker in my soul. The parents meanwhile swam in supreme felicity. The eventful day passed on sad and sullen as a thundercloud. The eve of the day was come. I could scarcely breathe. I had in precaution filled several chests with gold. I watched the midnight hour approach. It struck. I now sat, my eye fixed on the fingers of the clock, counting the minutes, the seconds, like dagger strokes. At every noise which arose, I started. The day broke. The leaden hours crowded upon each other. It was noon, evening, night. As the clock fingers sped on, hope withered. It struck 11, and nothing appeared. The last minutes of the last hour fell, and nothing appeared. It struck the first stroke, the last stroke of the 12th hour, and I sank hopeless and in boundless tears upon my bed. The morrow I should, forever shadowless, solicit the hand of my beloved. Towards morning an anxious sleep pressed down my eyelids. End of Chapter 4. Recording by Ashley M.